Thank you for the wonderful speech.
My pleasure.
Can you make some comment about the learning of coding and also how you would recommend kids to go about it?
So coding today is easily accessible. So when I talked about it 3 years ago, it was difficult to find, but now you have First Code Academy, you have Coding Kingdom, you have a gazillion places to find coding. I wouldn't look at coding as much as, coding to me is a necessity for our children because the whole world runs on code. So it's not for them to be expert coders, it's for them just to understand the culture of it. So the same thing if you, there's an example, for instance, if you look at the remote control. The remote control of today is really complicated, and some of them are LCD screens, because essentially it's a programmable interface. Whereas perhaps our generation or slightly older generation would look at a remote control and just wants a single button or two. And if they don't grow up in an environment where they understand how that works, they won't be able to function with these devices. They get a, let's say, call it a remote control of the future, and they won't know what to do with it. So the idea for them to be exposed to code is really more to understand the culture, not necessarily for them to be coding per se. And Coding Kingdom and those guys provide very good sort of initial services, but it's also visual coding. If you want to do it at home, you can do it with Scratch, it's free. But the next step is a little harder. So if they want to go into actual scripting with like Python or so on, then there is not a lot in Hong Kong at the moment that bridges that particular gap. It's actually a problem that I have with my son, where he has to basically be taught by professionals because there's nothing to transition them from the elementary level to something more senior.
All right, next question over here.
I think this question was mentioned before, but I forgot the answer. I forgot what this discussion was about. My son just came to that stage, so it came back to my mind again. It's about the violence in the computer games, because I can't really stop them from playing. But when I see them play, even in Minecraft, there three of the classmates playing together at the same time, put the speaker on, but they're sort of killing people with all sorts of weapons. How worried should I be, and should I worry about it at all? Or do you have a list of child-friendly servers to recommend to us, so whenever they're playing Minecraft, I can be worry-free?
The only way to be worry-free with what your kids are doing is to do it with them, which is difficult, I recognize. No,
I don't enjoy
and
that.
I'm not suggesting that you necessarily kill people, but you also have to, the context is unclear, and I do know Emerson a little bit, but the context is unclear to me as to what is he actually killing. So is he killing his friends, or is he killing zombies in Minecraft, or is he killing creepers? I don't know, right? So in Minecraft, they do have a lot of elements of so-called violence, but the actual violence inside, in my opinion, and this is very much an opinion, because children are different, and parental values in their households are different. But in my opinion, the Minecraft inside violence is cartoon violence. It's very different from playing something like, like Call of Duty, where heads are flying off and blood splattering all over the place. That doesn't happen in Minecraft, because essentially they're blocky creatures. It's essentially like you have a Lego construction that gets shattered every time. Right? So it's not as aggressive, but they do find fun in essentially destroying these zombies because they are a threat. But I don't know how much of that is really different from when you talk about real life play, where people basically sort of play in a competing manner. And it's not actually, people are concerned about violence because they think it promotes certain traits. I haven't found it with my children because it's treated differently in terms of when they play and they kill zombies, it's zombies. And anyway, they look like Lego constructions. Where it becomes hairy is when they start griefing. And griefing is basically when people who have more power than others start to bully basically other players on Minecraft. And so what happens is that someone who has, let's say, is a very experienced player, feels like he can essentially bully less experienced players. And because he has more powerful weapons, he can easily dispatch them. And it's a bloodbath. And that's not good. But it's in particular not good because the people who are playing, they feel like, oh, this is, they might feel hurt by it. But the way that the net works, and this is the same for message boards and any kind of social community, is that essentially if that happens often on a server, they leave. Right? And that's the whole sort of network intelligence and sort of network approach, which is that if they know that they can leave, and that's the important part, if they know that they have options, that there's 10,000 other Minecraft servers to go, or that there's many other people to play with, then it won't get to them, which is what we do, right? It's like, okay, I don't have time for this, I go. But that's something that needs some education in terms of just sort of, awareness. Because if they don't know how to find another server to play with, or if they don't know who to play with, or or that's wrong, for instance, right? Kind of like just like bullying in school, for instance, right? If they don't know that, then they are not equipped for it. So, but they have choices. So if they find, now if he enjoys it, right, then I don't think it's necessarily wrong, because he's doing it with a bunch of friends and he's getting entertainment out of it. Unless you're suddenly seeing worrying behavior traits, I don't know. Now, I also think it's a good idea to, even if you're not playing with him all the time, I think it's a good idea to just engage in his world. It may be alien, but I think it's important, because if you need to know a little bit what he's doing. I find that, for instance, for my son, his most favorite time is to play with me, as opposed to maybe in a few more years it'll be different. But for now, he's 10, and playing together is what he likes to do. And I think it's not that different from if you go play sports together, or if you play soccer together. It's just a virtual form of community. And we talk a lot. If you look at Minecraft, if you see people play Minecraft in a networked environment, next to each other, there's a lot of talk. It's not quiet. And you've been to my home, right? So you've seen this chat, 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 chat. Everyone's sort of strategizing, talking. So it's actually very social.
Pat, you've
Sure.
given a great presentation tonight. There's actually a lot more depth and layers to what you said. But building on what you've just said about the violence, research, and I'll provide you the research
Sure.
backup on this one. Research into this over the past decade or so tracks that games have become more violent, become more graphic, become more targeted. However, violence among teens and children has decreased. And the teens and the children are the ones who are playing these games. So what we're finding, or what the research is finding, is that the children are learning the moral values. They do differentiate, they do distinguish between what is happening in a game and what happens or should happen in the real world between their peers. That's not to say that we don't beat up on people and hit on people. This is my punching bag. That doesn't happen in the real world, but your children do understand the difference, and they are able to navigate between the real world and the violent, not world, fake world. And research is backing that up.
Thank you for that. I think the other point, though, what the connected world does, if you talk about network intelligence, and when I talked about how knowledge is created by everyone, knowledge, even wrong knowledge, is created by everyone, right? So it's not just knowledge from people who are experts and self-policed. And extremism is also rising in areas because social networks connect them, because they're basically listening to their own echo chamber. So on one hand, social networks provide a broader network intelligence. That's important. But the other thing, because many, and I think this is sort of the gap. Authoritative knowledge is something that we grew up with, and there's a gap between essentially understanding how to deal with this sort of everyone creates knowledge and discerning, because that's not what we teach our children at the moment. Because the learning environments are typically all authoritative in terms of, I know what's right, you listen to me. So you transplant that kind of feeling and bring it to a social environment, and you reinforce it with 1,000 other people who are like that. And then you create basically that reinforcing feeling. Frankly, it's also how people do viral marketing, because they know how to tap into that. So there's a lot of psychology in this. So I think the tools really is more about essentially educating or training them to know that there's choices and to listen to multiple voices. And I think one of the problems now is that we're not equipping them per se, right? Because it's not how schools are set up at the moment. I mean, around the world, right? Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah, as you mentioned, lots and lots of things. But perhaps to kind of distill it a little bit, what takeaway might you have, in terms of for parents? If you have 2 or 3 takeaways, what might you recommend in terms of what they can do? A lot of what you are suggesting really talks about people use 21st century skill set, collaboration, resilience, and the like. So what can parents do, or should parents do, in your view, based on your experience? And perhaps what should schools do? Again, what should schools do? Because again, when talking about education, it is a mixed bag. Thank you.
Okay, this is a difficult question because I'm not an educator. So I'll talk first from the perspective of someone who's hiring first, right? Because when we talk to the universities, we always have lots of debate and discussion in terms of what skill sets do we want staff to have. And in fact, it's the same for companies like LinkedIn and Google and so on. First is we need them to be independent as much as possible, right? Because we don't want them to be followers. Now, the problem with that thinking, of course, is that because we're not a factory, call it the creative industry or the tech industry, everyone has to basically come up with ideas of themselves. So we have small pockets of teams coming up with stuff, which is how Google works and which is how Amazon and those guys work. Essentially with small, think of them as SWAT teams. And there's methodologies, whether it's, agile development or so on. I'm sure all of you have heard versions of that. And agile development, the principles behind that essentially is, for instance, in Scrum, 30 days, you have to have something finished. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how crap it is. You build in 30 days, and then you disassemble, basically, and you build again in 30 days, and you disassemble. So every 30 days, you have a product ready, no matter how crappy it is, right? And it doesn't matter that it fails or falls over. You just have to have something finished. So it creates a very agile development set, right? This is very difficult for many of the local university kids to handle because they don't think that way, because they haven't been trained to basically be as flexible. They're basically thinking in terms of, okay, I have 1 year to make this, or because an assignment might be like, 1 year, or they're trained to work in a different way. So they have to basically rethink that. So, and it's really more of a mindset. The actual skills are not even that important. Some of our best coders didn't learn programming, but have a mathematics background. And if you look at basically the concept of mass amortization, the reality is that coding is only going to become easier for our children's generation, not harder. Because if you think about it, just take, I don't know how many of you have coded. I don't think anyone here is old enough for punch cards, but some of you may have touched assembly, right? I have. And it's a nightmare, right? It's basically bits and codes, that's it. But now, basically, it's structured language. And in fact, there's a lot of languages out there. If you think about people coding on games, Unity is the new Flash. Anyone who doesn't even know how to code properly can actually make a game. So this amortization continues, right? Because technology makes it easier for you. So it's not really as important from our standpoint that they have to have the technical skills. They can pick those up. What they have to have is more mindset. That's from an employer standpoint. Attitude, flexibility, freedom, and collaborative skills. So that means essentially emotional skills are important, because it's really hard to collaborate if you have no EQ. So that means we have to basically make sure that they're able to talk well to others and deal with conflict, right? Which is a challenge. All of us have this problem. But in the workplace, even more so, because we need them to resolve problems. You can't resolve problems when nobody talks to each other, right? We're always about solving problems, basically. We try to get people who are natural problem solvers. Now, if you look at incubators, like Y Combinator and so on, where people get sort of ideas people together, very popular in the tech space, but I think it's true for all industries. The reason why incubators work so well, or accelerators as they call them, is because they qualify essentially 10, 20, 30 companies who are entrepreneurs. By definition, if you're an entrepreneur, you're already kind of outside of the mold, and you're trying to solve a problem. So you're already thinking as a problem solver. And the reason why these incubators work so well is because when you connect 30 people, all problem solvers in different industries, and they meet with each other, they end up basically solving problems for others, because that's how they're wired. So someone could be from the fishing industry, but he's a natural problem solver. He can solve a problem for someone in, technology, because he'll think of it in terms of a solution. Right? So it's basically just creating the right kind of minds that come together. I don't know if I've answered that, but essentially, it's kind of a way of answering.
My daughter is in grade 7, and every day when she goes home, she will be like, on the Skype or like the group class chat all the time. So, is this a networking situation that I should stop, or like limit her time? Because ISF, we have so much Chinese, other things that we need to do. So it's just that, I know it's important, IT, but, what is the kind of limits that we should put?
So did you grow up in Hong Kong? You grew up in Hong Kong?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can't really speak for how it is in Hong Kong, but did you have a lot of phone calls with your friends when you were a teenager? I'm just asking a question. No? Not really? Okay, well, the reflection I have, certainly in the West, I grew up in Europe and in the US, everyone was on the phone, right? I mean, it was fighting over the phone in terms of the family household. That's the environment that I knew, and that's the environment that I knew as my social circle. So Hong Kong may be different because I didn't grow up as a child here. But basically, we were always on the phone, chatting with each other all the time, right? And essentially what people are doing on Skype, and I'm surprised it's Skype because I would have thought it's something like WeChat or so it sounds more traditional.
Everything, WeChat and WhatsApp.
Right.
So 3 at
Yes.
the same time.
But, well, okay, so that's more like it. Okay, now I get it. The way that I look at it is that kind of social communication is something that we needed as children. At least I needed it, and everyone I knew. But of course, we didn't grow up in Hong Kong. And so as a result, it's natural. The only thing that technology now does is enable it even more easier. The other thing, when I talked about resumption lags and sort of task switching, it provides breaks. So the feeling is that, yes, maybe they're not concentrating enough because they feel like they can't finish the task at hand. But the question is, what task are they finishing? Are they finishing something that is more robotic in nature that they have to complete, or is it something that is creative in its endeavor? And this is where I think it's there's a famous quote by Joey Ito, who is the head of MIT Media Lab, and he basically said, if we are worried about a future where AI will be smarter than us, then why are we teaching our kids to do the things that computers can do better, right? So the idea basically being that it depends on the task that they're doing, and the idea of collaboration with, whether it's WeChat or Skype, is that they can have ideas generating from the chat because it's social. So it's a virtual extension of people being, let's say, as opposed to being together huddled in a room talking to each other, it's people basically connecting with each other virtually with ideas. And it could be that she's asking questions about the homework. It could be that she's asking questions about, I don't know, people, right? It could be everything. But those breaks are not necessarily a bad thing. Because if you look at companies like Google, they want to create these breaks so people can be sort of, not just have relaxed time, but have also ideas in the process. But yeah, it depends. I mean, I can't speak for, there is a very dicey topic as to whether you should know what they're talking about. Typically speaking, the advice I give is not to know, because it is a serious invasion of privacy, and it will be definitely looked upon badly, and is one of the reasons why all the teenagers have basically fled Facebook and have gone to Snapchat. Right.
I really appreciate your sharing the movie versus, the mom would tell him, hey, time's up. But I just want to ask for, how do you do it? You're a parent. Obviously, we don't want them to, because as you said, games naturally wants you to keep going.
Yes.
But of course, it's not nice to have someone keep telling you, hey, it's time. And, we try different methods so that they can have their own self-control. But I just wonder, as a parent, how do you work this out with your child?
So the method I typically use is, and it's easier for me because I know what they're doing, because I play with them. So I basically look at what they're doing and say, okay, you finish that. Meaning it's either a task, a quest, or a level. So I'm being very specific about what they need to finish. And it gives them a sense of closure, and then they know they have to go, right? So it means, now in certain other kind of games, you could have levels, right? Typically, what children are playing today are not level type games anymore, but they're more free-form games like Minecraft, where basically you can play, do whatever you want. And the advantage is you can take them out as well, right? So basically, rather than giving them a clock, if he's basically building, I don't know, a castle if you want, or if he's building something with his friends, or if he's killing 10 zombies or so on, right? You give him a kill count. You say, okay, fine, 30 zombies, and then you go. All right, it's a goal. It's something to go for. And it works, at least for my kids, because it's a goal. It's like a target. Boom, 30 zombies. I feel good. I can go, right? As opposed to, they're in the middle of something. They don't know what their particular target is, and then you cut them off, right? But the challenge is if you don't know what they're doing, and then you just tell them stop, you don't know the context. And for them, you're just annoying them at that moment in time, right?
I appreciate that. Then my next question would be, I hear that your eldest is 10 years old.
Yes.
And what you talked about earlier is when parents tell them when to stop, right? My eldest is 11. Oh, he just turned 11, and I'm hoping that, you know, I may still have 1 or 2 years whereby it would go from parental control to self-control, because I cannot stay with him and watch him playing video games until he is, I don't know how old. So how do you train him in terms of, are you, you know, having a chat with him daily and telling him, hey, you know, whenever you play video games, try to give yourself a goal, you know, 30 zombies and I'll stop. I mean, I think even for adults, it's difficult.
So there is a there is some area of research, and it is exploratory. So this is not authoritative at the moment, but what our think tank is working on at the moment. The research relates to whether early or late exposure creates more of an addiction habit with the use of computers. Right? And the theory goes, and there is pro and con arguments. The theory goes that if you expose someone early on to something, right, then it's not special anymore, and they can manage it better. Whereas if you end up exposing it to them late, even though it's desirable, by the time you expose it to them, they lose a certain amount of self-control. It's almost like a drug, right? And that is essentially, you know, there is debate on this topic, so it's not clear. So from my own personal experience, though, is that, well, not just because I'm in tech, generally I've exposed my children to technology right from the beginning. And for them, it's just something they always had. So an example which is interesting is that when, I won't name which school, but when my son basically received his laptop, everyone, a lot of his fellow kids, schoolmates were like, oh, can we take the laptop home? Can we use it? Is it ours? Is it not? Or whatever. My son took it and basically just passed it on to his mom, Michelle, and said, okay, I don't care, right? Because he basically has a computer at home. It's not a big deal for him. And it's not something that was important for him because nothing special. He has his own computer. He's had his own computer since he was 5, right? So there is no particular behavior that's, you know, like that he has no particular addictive behavior. But it could also be, you know, when you look at things like sort of addiction, it's also individual, right? So it's not, you know, people have different type of dopamine receptors. So essentially some people are naturally a little bit more addictive than others. So it's a very individual question, right? It's very hard for me to sort of give you a general statement on this. Now, I find if you spend time with them and you understand the world that they're in, which is the harder part, then it's easier to have the conversation, right? Where the misunderstanding happens a lot is you don't know. So essentially you just want to restrict by time. That's the only thing we know, which is here, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's a bit like talking, it's a bit like when you talk to, imagine you're talking to someone in business and he's talking something rubbish. How do you feel about that, right? It's like, okay, he's talking nonsense. All right, yada, yada, yada. Okay, fine, done, right? I think children are the same. They're humans like us, right? If you're talking to them in the context of gibberish and something that doesn't make sense to them, then they'll treat it in that way. So knowing the subject matter, I think, is important. I do ask, or I do encourage parents always to play with them games online together. I know it's a hard, tall order, but I feel that it's worked very well for me. And for the small sample base that I have, I think it's worked. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the sharing. I'm just wondering, do you have any tips for me as a father and husband, how to create a more, I guess, welcoming, encouraging environment for my wife to join me and my sons to play more games, whether it be video or a tablet or just board games? Thank you.
I struggle with this with my own wife. I think for us, and Michelle, please feel free to say, but for us, I feel that we kind of, in that department, we live almost 2 separate lives, right? And I don't know that it's necessary for her to be in that world per se, because as long as I'm in that world, I think it's okay. I don't think we can all do everything together. Michelle has tried Minecraft, and my son has desperately tried to get her in. He installed it on her computer. He's given her tutorials, and it just hasn't worked. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. because they do other things together. So I think it's okay to not always do it together. Where I think we have a working understanding, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that she respects my decision on technology. So if I basically say, okay, fine, you have to finish this, even though dinner may have started already, she will let me do that, so he can finish it. So we might be 5 minutes late, right? She's not going to tell me that you have to have dinner now. I don't care, right? So those boundaries, I think, work. And likewise for whatever activity she's doing with them, I also don't try to interfere because I don't actually know what they're doing, right? Anyway, that's what we do.
Oh, there's a question over here.
So the question is, what's a guideline of how often I play? Generally, if my son finishes all of the stuff that he needs to finish, which in Hong Kong is a lot, of course, then he gets to play. So he plays every day. But it depends. It ranges from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. Typically when he's with friends, one of the first things, with the ones that we tend to restrict is not usually my son, but it's his friends. Because normally what happens when they come to our home, it's like, oh, there's a computer and we can play. And so they end up so we end up having to restrict their game time, otherwise they end up being there for maybe several hours. So that's typically it. So he typically plays, he's more excited when other people play with him. So when he's online, they tend to come online at a certain time because his friends come online as well, and they play for 30 minutes and then they go. So for how long will my child be addicted to Minecraft is the question. Just kidding. So is Lego a passing thing? No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, if you're hoping it's a passing thing, Minecraft hasn't proven to be a passing thing. Plants and Zombie, yes. But that's, okay, so it has to do with the setup of the game. So Plants and Zombies are level-based games where you have a finite end to it, right? So there's games that are designed that way where you end at a certain point, right? So that ending comes when you finish the level and you're done. And usually when they've completed everything and killed every zombie, that's it. That's gone. They lose interest. Minecraft is different, and it's where most of the games are going, which are basically what they call sort of free-form games, where you basically just enter the world and you do whatever. And where it becomes really powerful is a social aspect because you're actually playing with your friends. And that can go forever. And a lot of people, most of the people, a lot of children play Minecraft, but Minecraft is played by a lot of adults. It could be replaced by something else. If you look at technological trends, there's also all forms of other game options that they can choose from. But it will be similar in nature in the sense that it will be something that will be networked. Personally, I much prefer them playing Minecraft than, let's say, some latest massively multiplayer online game. Because I consider Minecraft educational and it's logical. Because in order to build better constructions in Minecraft, you have to know how to program. So my son's desire to learn to program came from Minecraft, from modifying Minecraft to basically create cool stuff. Right? So in that sense, I think Minecraft is much better. Whereas some other games basically don't allow any freedom. So you basically, in their world, in their environment where you have to do what the limits that they've set for you. So yes, but knowing what games your children play is important as well, right? You can't just let them play anything. And that's why it's important for you to know what they're doing, right? It's very hard to just have them play. Otherwise, they might be doing something. And Apple and Google are better at this now, where they have created ratings, right? So before they didn't have ratings. Now you have ratings that are essentially child safe. Same as it is for movies as well. Right?
You just mentioned that you prefer your children to play Minecraft, right? Are there any other games that you think are not harmful or educational for children apart from Minecraft?
There's a whole series of apps. I don't know that we have time to list all of them. It depends on what it is that we do. When I have a particular agenda with my kids, then I will push them certain apps. So for instance, right now, my son plays a lot of Guitar Bots. Guitar Bots is a guitar game, right? But it actually uses a real guitar. So that's how he's learning guitar, because he's playing competitively in Guitar Bots as a game. So there's different ways, that's for instance one kind of game. The other thing that I'm doing right now is that I'm getting him into a game called Europa Universalis because it's historical context. So a lot of games use history as a context, and some of them do it better than others. So I basically just like him to do that so he can learn as well. But there's many other types of games. There's drawing games, creative games. I think it's hard to just, there's games that I can push, but sometimes the games I push him, he doesn't want to play, right? It's like books I want him to read. No, I'm not interested. So I think the better way is, if he chooses the game, for you to know what it is and to try it, right, if possible. And, maybe if you don't want to do it, maybe you can get your husband to try, maybe, and play that role. I don't know.
If you look at games and you focus on just it being an education game, you're going to be missing a very important part that Pat actually commented on earlier, which is the EQ side of things. A lot of the development that goes on and the interaction, the socialization of it is something that is incredibly educational, but if you go to the education section of the App Store or education site, you won't find that in there. So while I appreciate, and you do want to look at things that are educational, and because there's value in it, as was commented on, you can't necessarily search that out and say you can only do educational games. You're going to be blowing it, and you're going to be speaking gibberish to your child.
Yeah, I agree. I think one other comment on this one is one way, and it's worked well for my son and his friends, and his parent group anyway, is I set up a Minecraft server. So that's where his friends play. So I can feel comfortable that nobody else that's from the outside that I don't trust or know is playing it, because it's essentially a private IP address. It's very easy to set up, but if you're not comfortable with it, maybe you can find a tech parent within your social circle and corral him to set up a Minecraft server, because maybe he's already playing it with his kids.
Or her.
Or her, that's right, yes, sorry. Or her, and get them to just participate. And because then the thing that you're concerned about is covered, right? It's no different than you basically sending the kids over to a play date to play soccer or something like that. You want to make sure that you trust whoever is running it. It's the same thing.
All right, I'll ask a question. Your kids are at the age where they're moving up through the grades. Let's say whatever school they're going to in roughly about the 6th grade, computers are going to become part of what they deal with on a daily basis. They're
Sure.
going to be handed a computer, be responsible for one from the school. How do you prepare your kids for the responsibilities of their own laptop computer, which is there for school use and then brought home and kept with them all the time, basically?
Interesting question, because I never really had a regime to prepare them per se. I just exposed them at an early age, and I did it with them, that's all, right? So all of our kids have their own computers. All of them basically have got access to it when they were basically 4 to 5 years of age, right? And they each have one that they can just use themselves and do whatever they want with. What I do with them is I walk through it with them. So if they have questions, I'm the person they talk to in terms of, okay, how do I use this, or how do I search for that, or whatever. But do we have protocols or rules set up? I know certain families do. They have like guides and rules, and I think some of them are good. But we've never really had to do that, because I think if you're there present, that will come through. I think it's the time that you spend with them on it. Because it's my industry, and because I care about that topic, I probably spend a lot of time walking them through it. So essentially, without having a rule book, I indirectly created one in terms of, what to search for, how much time they spend on this, the type, basically how to search. Google is natural to them, but how to search is important. And normally, they wouldn't necessarily know how to, so they ask questions. How do I search, or how do I do that? And eventually, as you go through that process, you talk to them, right? It's a dialogue, and in that dialogue, they pick something up, right? Now, I think the preparation, in the case of my son, who received his laptop from his school, because he had a computer at home, he doesn't have a relationship to the laptop. He treats that laptop as the laptop that's used for schoolwork. He doesn't actually treat it as something that is personal to him. His personal computer, where he plays games and so on, that's the one at home. So he divides the two. The two are not related. In fact, he doesn't even want to bring it back, because for him it's a burden, because he has a computer. Frankly, the computer he has at home is more powerful than one that the school gives him, right? And he can do more stuff with it anyway. So I think it also depends on, I think it has something to do with the exposure. early exposure, I think, is helpful, so that it doesn't become something too desirable. Where it just becomes lifestyle, something that we're all used to. It's nothing special. Right.
Maybe our children not in the not at the age yet, but eventually, I think part of your question also includes like, once our children found, oh, they can search hot girls on YouTube, right? And they don't have to use the computer in front of us. And then when that question comes, I think it's more of a parenting question. What would you
Talk
do?
about porn, right? So,
I mean, it could be porn, it could be violence.
Sure.
You know, there's all sorts of, it's not a fenced-in environment.
The issue of what does my child access, other than the individual thing, in terms of, is, in my view, very difficult to manage, because that's not something that you can restrict, other than exposing and explaining. I was surprised when we had to consider sort of sex ed conversation with our daughter at 8 years of age. But apparently they start young with a conversation these days. I don't know. That's what Michelle had to do. The thing is, I think we just have to educate them on these values, not necessarily on the technology per se. So if they understand what is right or what is wrong, then when they go and see it, they know how to handle it. I don't think we can stop it, because if they don't get it here, they'll get it elsewhere. And if I look at just my childhood, if I needed to get porn magazines, because those were magazines back then, I could just go to a friend's place if I wanted to have exposure to it, right? If I couldn't get it myself, there are other ways to get it. So if you really want it, you can get it. The question is, what do you, like, when you have access to it, how do you handle it? I think that's the more important question. I don't think we can prevent it. I think preventing them is shielding them from the reality that is out there, and I think that's hard. But I understand the anguish that's involved. I think it's just part of, I don't have a clear answer for you, but basically for us, it's just, we talk about just values in general and hope that it seeps through, right?
Done. Okay. Sorry. So no more questions? Okay. So thank you, Yat, for the talk, and we have a souvenir here for Michelle. Probably
An
have
umbrella?
Yeah, an umbrella. Very useful. Very useful.